I grew up in a haunted house in Southern California. This is one of the events that occurred while living in that house. This particular event, I'm not sure actually happened. Basically, I don't know if it was just an extremely vivid dream, a hallucination from being so tired, or something that really happened. This happened when I was about 14 years old, so it was over 10 years ago. I don't remember much about what went on throughout the day, but I remember staying up really late, studying for upcoming midterms. I think it was a Friday or Saturday night. Here's an idea of my bedroom setup, which is kind of important to know for the story. Basically, my bed was against the wall, long ways across from my door, and up against a sliding window, so I was basically sleeping against the window. My dresser was right next to my door, and it had a large vanity mirror on it where I could see the end of my bed in the reflection while laying down and also the edge of the window. So I'm up late studying, and I think I fell asleep while studying. But like I said, I'm not exactly sure. I was laying down in my bed with my books out next to me, and I remember looking out the window. I didn't have any curtains or anything, so I can see straight out into the backyard, no problem. I thought I saw something moving in the wind, but figured it was just our mulberry tree shaking, or even maybe our dogs. We had 2 male adult chow chows. For those who don't know this breed, they are extremely loyal to few people, only 1 or 2 in the family, and extremely protective of these people. Since my room was towards the backyard, they always slept right under my window, because I was the one they were most loyal to. I raised them both since they were puppies, so we had a strong bond. Thinking maybe the dogs were just playing around, I ignored whatever I saw moving in the dark and tried to focus back on my studies. Then I heard what sounded like something falling or crashing in the yard. My dad is a welder and kept a lot of work materials in our yard, secured of course. So I thought maybe the wind knocked something down or the dogs bumped into something. Again, I just blew it off until I looked out the window again. There it was. A phantom-like entity was floating right outside my window. I don't say ghost or spirit because this thing looked solid. I say floating because there was no way it could have been standing, being how tall it was and the way it was standing. It had to be at least 10 foot tall. It looked like it was swimming in the wind with the way it moved. This phantom looked like it had a theater mask on. The closest thing I can think about is the Phantom of the Opera. The only difference was it had a full face white mask instead of a half mask. Except it wasn't a mask, it was its face. I could tell because when I saw its hands, they were equally porcelain-like and white. The eyes were hollow pools of black ink, and it was dressed in some sort of cloak. When I saw it, I was frozen in place, not believing what I was seeing. Then it started making gestures at me, hand gestures and head movements, as if telling me to leave with it. I shook my head to tell it no. It kept gesturing me to go with it, but this time it was a little more aggressive with its gestures. I shook my head again. At this point, I'm not only terrified but confused as well. Why weren't my dogs making any noise? They couldn't still be asleep. I mean, sure, it was probably 2 a.m., but they have always been hypersensitive to everything. Even when I get that eerie feeling of something watching me, they would always start barking and running around as if chasing something away. Also, they always slept right under my window, and this thing should be floating right above them, so how are they still sleeping? Keep in mind these thoughts all came at 1,000,000 miles per hour. I looked towards my bedroom door and realized it was closed shut. My door was kind of broken, so it takes a second to open sometimes. I looked at the mirror opposite my bed and saw the phantom entity now looking mad and was pressing up against my window. Even with all this, I couldn't manage to move or scream. Next thing I know, I see the phantom's hand go through the closed window. As if this wasn't scary enough, as the porcelain white hand went through the glass, it began to change into a hairy, dirty, rotting hand. It was reaching through the window to grab me. At this point, I shut my eyes and screamed. I don't know why I didn't just get up and go, but I felt like my legs were too heavy to move this whole time. When I finally opened my eyes, it was gone. I don't know what possessed me to open my window. As if this wasn't scary enough, as the porcelain white hand went through the glass, it began to change into a hairy, dirty, rotting hand. It was reaching through the window to grab me. At this point, I shut my eyes and screamed. I don't know why I didn't get up and go, but I felt like my legs were too heavy to move this whole time. When I finally opened my eyes, it was gone. I don't know what possessed me to open my window, but I did so to quickly look for my dogs, and they were asleep under the window as usual. Nothing unusual out in the yard, but I still felt as if I was in danger. I decided against sleeping in my room that night, so I grabbed a blanket and headed to the living room. My mom has severe insomnia, and this was due to her computer addiction, so she was in the living room on the computer when I walked out of my room and laid on the couch. She asked me what I was doing and if I was feeling sick. Apparently I was ghostly pale, shaking, and sweating, so she thought I might be ill. I told her what happened, and she was surprised because she never heard me scream. Our house wasn't big enough for her to not hear me from the living room, so we were both confused. My mom then suggested maybe I had a night terror since our dogs didn't react to anything. She didn't hear me scream, and the phantom disappeared after I shut and opened my eyes. I am not entirely convinced this was a night terror because I don't remember even falling asleep, but I'm also not convinced it wasn't either. My family is religious, so I reached out to my pastor about this experience. My parents had done prayers in my room, so my pastor also performed the blessing in my room and our yard, since technically it was outside my window. My pastor isn't convinced it was a dream, but believes it was more of a vision, something I saw while awake, but it still wasn't there. I'm not sure what to believe. All I know is that I was terrified. Luckily, I never saw this phantom entity again. We continued to live in this house for another 3 years before finally moving out. When I was little, maybe around 7 or so, I had my first paranormal experience. My mom always told me that she felt like I attracted things from the spiritual realm, even as a baby, but this experience is the first one that is my own memory, and I remember it vividly, and I'm now 26 years old. My mom was unlucky enough to have not only my father die, but also my little sister's father. My dad passed away due to a car accident, and my sister's dad committed suicide after a battle with severe depression. Needless to say, my mom had it pretty rough, and being a single working mother, she would often take us to a family friend who babysat us while she worked late nights at the hospital. The woman who babysat us was a warm, kind, and gentle woman named Rhonda. She always took the best care of us and my sister, and I really enjoyed staying with her. Rhonda had 2 birds who we loved to talk to, and they would repeat simple things like hello and what's up. We thought it was the coolest thing. After a long day of playing, my sister and I were off to bed, and Rhonda tucked me into my bed in her spare room downstairs. My sister was still pretty little, and she slept in the same room as Rhonda because she was too scared to sleep alone. And Rhonda was like a grandma to us, who was more than happy to share her bed if we got scared. I was a big girl, and loved having my own room to sleep in, and I was never scared. On this night though, I was having trouble falling asleep, and I just kept tossing and turning, growing frustrated that I wasn't asleep, and for some reason, I began to get anxiety and become fearful. I didn't know why I was so scared, but I was. After what felt like forever of me laying there, contemplating getting up and crawling into Rhonda's bed, I heard something in a low, calm male voice say, "Marissa, it's okay, just go to sleep." This surprised me, but it didn't scare me. I believe that as a child, you're more open and susceptible to paranormal things due to the fact that you're not conditioned to be fearful yet. With age, you learn what's scary and all the things that go bump in the night that you should run away from. But I was still so innocent that I didn't register this as threatening. Actually, this calmed me down and I started to feel very tired and just accepted what the voice told me and went to sleep. The next morning, Rhonda made us breakfast as she always did. She sat across from me and sipped her coffee that I always asked for a sip of because if I wasn't already a strange child, I also had a taste for coffee. She asked me how I slept, and I told her that I was scared and that someone told me to go to sleep. She looked at me confused and she asked me if I had a dream that someone was talking to me, and I told her no, I was awake. She said it was probably the birds talking, and again, I told her I was sure it wasn't. She then asked me if it was a man's voice or a woman's voice, and when I instantly said it was a man's voice, her face changed from the usual cheery warm expression to put off and uncomfortable. I had never seen her face look like that before, and I think that's why I remembered this so vividly. She changed the subject quickly, and we went about our day, and I didn't think about that again for years. Fast forward into my teens, my mom and I were having a discussion about the paranormal because I had a lot of strange activity happening, and she asked me what the first experience I remember is. I shared the story about the man's voice at Rhonda's house and how odd Rhonda's reaction was, and my mom looked at me and her eyes widened a bit. Now, Rhonda went a little MIA a few years later, and unfortunately, she just slowly lost contact with us, and eventually, she was no longer part of our lives. I hadn't seen her in years. When my mom collected her thoughts, she looked at me and said, "Marissa, you know Rhonda's son died in that room, right?" I did not. I knew she had a son who passed away of a tragic overdose, but I was so young and never met him, so I didn't think about it. I looked back at my mom, and we didn't have to say anything. We both were thinking the same thing. If I was hearing a spirit speak to me, there's a good chance it could have been her son. From what my mom said about him, he was a very kind and caring person, much like his mom. Maybe that's why I wasn't afraid when if he, spoke to me. I'm not saying that this is factually what happened, but it does make me wonder. The voice I heard was real. That much I do know. Regardless of who it belonged to, it's sure to me that much is true. Since that experience, I've had many more, and unfortunately, they got much more sinister as I got older. It got very dark for a while, and I witnessed things that you usually only see in horror movies. I still think of this experience often, and I hope that you enjoyed reading my testimony. If you did enjoy this story, I also share my experiences as well as other strange and unusual things on my YouTube channel. My handle is Marissa White. If you're more of a reader than a watcher, then not to worry. I'll be sharing more on here as well. Thank you for taking the time to read this, and remember, the spiritual realm is just as real as you or I. Figured I'd post these stories here. Hope you guys enjoy them. So, my dad used to work at this restaurant that was extremely haunted. The building was very old, built sometime in the mid 1800s, and there were records of at least a few deaths happening on the premises back when it used to be a boarding house. Staff used to complain about cold spots, weird smells, and sometimes something would push them when there was no one around. But there are two first-hand accounts from my family directly. The first story is my mother's. Well, technically I was there too, but I don't remember it. I was only 2 at the time. It was my dad's turn to open up the restaurant that day, and she had gone with my father to spend some extra time with him while he did prep work. She went to the bathroom and took me with her. As she was washing her hands, she heard 3 knocks on the bathroom door. Knock, 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 evenly spaced. She thought that my dad was playing a joke on her, so she whispered to me, "Your father has no rhythm," and knocked back a fun pattern, a rat-tap-tap, tap-tap, tap, tap. She expected my dad to crack a joke or knock back in a playful way, but instead came the same 3 evenly spaced knocks. After she left the washroom, she saw my dad coming down from the 2nd floor of the restaurant. "Very funny, honey," she said. My dad was very confused. He had no idea what she was talking about. To this day, he says that he didn't knock on the bathroom door. The restaurant was locked. You don't want customers wandering in before you're open. After all, my parents and I were the only people there. That's the first story. The second is mine. But before I tell it, I'd like to go on a brief tangent and describe the restaurant a little bit better and give you a better feel for the overall vibe. In general, the interior was always pretty dark. The only windows in the place were at the front of the building, facing the street, and that natural light didn't do much because the building was very long. The back of the restaurant, near the kitchens, was the darkest place in the whole building, but it always felt the coziest to me. No, the worst area was paradoxically the brightest. There was a patio attached to the 2nd floor with an adjoining sunroom, the worst room in the whole building. The rest of the restaurant was very cramped and very dim, very Dickensian, good old Victorian architectural design. The sunroom, in contrast, was very open, very light, and it had a lovely view of the patio and the pretty flower boxes we had out there, and I hated it. Standing in that big, empty room, you could feel all the space behind you, and you always had the unsettling thought that something was watching you. I used to hug the walls whenever I was in there, because that way, nothing could stand behind me. I mention this because my story happens on the 2nd floor. Normally, I was scared to be on the 2nd floor at all, but it wasn't so bad because I was with other people and had a job to distract myself with. It was actually the first time that I had ever had fun being up there. That didn't last long though. The first strange thing that happened was that a painting went flying off the wall, and I do mean flying. It didn't just fall, it went a good few feet horizontally. Of course, this was spooky, but we all just rationalized it, put the painting back on the wall, and kept working because people were going to start arriving in a few hours. Once the event got started, that was when the real trouble began. One of our friends, Sally, went into the 2nd floor bathroom. When she tried to leave, the door wouldn't open, even though it wasn't locked. At this point, she got a bit nervous and knocked on the door, hoping that someone on the other side could help her get it open. And that set something off, because suddenly the entire bathroom erupted into loud banging. It was a commotion. People outside heard, including me, and we all gathered around the bathroom door to try and get her out of there. We had her locked and then unlocked the door. We jiggled the doorknob. We even tried forcing it open. Nothing worked. Inside, what was muffled banging to us sounded deafeningly loud to Sally. It really freaked her out. We were only able to get the door open once the mysterious noise had stopped. Weirdly, we'd never had any issue with the door sticking before, and I don't think we had one after. Sally put on a brave face, but it was clear that she was pretty rattled. In private, she later confided that it was one of the most frightening things that had ever happened to her. Later on, after all the guests had left, I was helping clean up. We had a small stand of necklaces for sale set up on the minibar. A pendant in the middle started swaying forward and backwards, like someone had flicked it with their finger. The rest of the necklaces were perfectly still. My mom saw this too. We both looked at each other and quietly decided that it would be best to not make a fuss and get out of there as quickly as possible. I think that night set a record for the most unexplained events that had happened in the restaurant at once. It closed down a few years later and was mostly torn down and rebuilt. I don't know if the new building is still haunted or not.